welcome back to my channel. My name is Jordan and today we're going to be talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. Now this is a long awaited and long requested review on my channel. You guys have been very curious about my thoughts on this book ever since I read Throne of Glass, which was actually the first ever review I did on this channel. And so I finally got around to reading this book and I didn't like it, so we're going to be talking about that today, and we're going to be doing this in the usual fashion, which is by splitting it up into a short, non-spoiler review and then a longer, more in-depth review where I really discuss my kind of thoughts and feelings on all of the things in this. So let's just dive right in. This book is a Beauty and the Beast retelling following a human named Feyre who lives in a world that is divided between humans and fairies. I actually didn't know that this was a Beauty and the Beast retelling before I read the book, nor did I figure it out while I was reading the book, but I guess in hindsight it kind of makes sense, and I'm going to talk about my thoughts and feelings later on in the review. So one day, Feyre discovers a massive wolf in the forest while she's hunting, and she suspects that it might be a fairy who has slipped past the border wall and is human territory, but she doesn't know for sure, and she ends up killing it and skinning it to sell its fur in the market. It does, in fact, turn out to be a fairy, and another fairy comes from Prythian, the land of the fairies, and he basically claims her life for the life of his friend and takes her to the land of Prythian, and that is all you get to know for now. So as I said, I did not like this book, guys. I thought that the pacing of it and the plot in general was a bit of a nightmare. The structure of it didn't really work. It felt like 2/3 of the book was filler and build-up and exposition, and only about 1/3 of it was actual plot and story, which made the last part of the book feel way too rushed to be explored properly. On top of that, there are just many aspects of the plot that I didn't feel made sense or were just really frustrating. And good lord, speaking of frustrating, the protagonist in this book, Feyre, is one of the most frustrating protagonists I have read in a very, very long time. She rarely acts like a human being would act in any given situation, and on top of that, she just has so little personality that despite spending over 400 pages in her head, I really don't know who she is. She really irritated me, but I'm going to get more into the reasons behind that in the spoiler section. So moving on from that, the other characters, I just felt the vast majority of them were fairly weak, though there were two that I really enjoyed, which I will also discuss in the spoiler section, but overall I just felt that there wasn't enough character development in general, nor did I feel like the characters were fleshed out enough or three-dimensional enough to create a vivid and interesting story. The actual words and writing of it I felt was pretty weak as well. A lot of the descriptions were very wordy without saying a lot, and there was a lot of times where the description itself would be very weird and like did not have the intended effect, I don't think. Overall, I just felt that there were way too many words for what was being said. The world building in this book was not the worst offender by any stretch. It's definitely not a heavy world building kind of book, but I think that's fine for what it is. It's clearly a romantic fantasy, and for that kind of thing, I don't think there necessarily needs to be Tolkien level world building. It's the bare minimum of what it needs to be, which I think is fine, but I just think that the world building could have been communicated better. I thought that a lot of the exposition and building of the world happened through these really long info dumps, which I will also discuss later. I just didn't feel like it was communicated in a way that was interesting or engaging. So basically, I would not recommend this book. But with that out of the way, let's get into the spoiler section where I can really dive into my feelings and thoughts and the nitty-gritty of why I really did not like this book. Okay, so the structure of this book is very bizarre, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's trying to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but I just don't think it's a very successful Beauty and the Beast retelling, and therefore I think that the plot really lagged because of the structure of it. The love story in Beauty and the Beast is integral to the story. It is the heart of the story, and despite spending so many pages of this book dedicated to building the relationship between Feyre and Tamlin, I just didn't buy it. I'll get more into that in a second. So the first 2/3 of this book ends up being mostly establisher, and in this we discover that Feyre's home life is not so good. She basically has a terrible life where she is forced to hunt for the survival of her family, but they're all really mean. Like, her sisters are super mean and exclusionary to her. Her father is kind of absent, but just does not care to provide for his children. And overall, none of them are really appreciative of all that she does. She basically is the reason that they're alive. So after she kills and skins a fairy, another fairy named Tamlin comes to her house and basically says that because of the treaty that the humans made with the fairies, he has two options. He can either kill her, or she can go with him to his lavish estate in Prythian, where she will never have to hunt again, and she can live out the rest of her days in peace and prosperity, being waited on by other fairies, and where she can pursue her passions, which is painting, just for the rest of her life in eternal spring. It sounds awful, doesn't it? Wonder which one she chose. Obviously that. So she goes with Tamlin to Prythian, to his beautiful manor, and despite none of the fairies in the estate showing any aggression to her after the initial, like, I could kill you or you could come with me, she spends the better part of like 100 pages just being like, oh my god, no, I need to get back to my family because I made a promise to my mom on her deathbed, even though she hates her mom as well, because her mom was also a garbage person. She's like, oh yes, no, I made a promise to my mom on her deathbed that I will always look out for my family. So she wants to go back to the human world for reasons. Even though Tamlin has already said that he's looking after her family, so, you know, she doesn't have to worry about that. Her debt has been paid. Her promise has been fulfilled. She's basically doing more harm than good if she goes back. After he says that a couple times, she's still like, oh no, I must go back to my home where I live my horrible, crappy life. That was an extremely frustrating segment of the book, because we all know that she's going to end up staying in Prythian. Like, we all know that this is a romantic fantasy. Like, there is just not enough good reasons for her to want to go home, and so it just feels like annoying, frustrating filler, and like trying to make a problem out of nothing. So in the last third of the book, we discover that all of the contrived and frustrating plot points are all actually a ruse designed by Tamlin, because he was under a curse by an evil fairy named Amarantha, who's trying to take control over Prythian. The amount of ridiculous details and nitpicky things in this curse, though, are absolutely ridiculous, and you can tell it's only because the author is trying to make it more Beauty and the Beast-like. Like, for example, Tamlin, for the entirety of the book, has a mask on his face, but only covering his eyes, because I guess that's hiding how hot he is, even though we're well aware of how hot he is by his gorgeous body and defined jaw and piercing emerald eyes and sandy blonde hair that is described numerous times throughout. So I'm not really sure what the mask is trying to do, but also just the amount of really specific details of what needs to happen in order for the curse to be broken is absolutely ridiculous. And the reasoning behind the curse is also, it's less ridiculous, but it's just also so much exposition that could have been simplified by a lot. All of this is explained via ridiculous amounts of expositional dialogue that is just so dull. That was the part of the world building that drove me absolutely nuts. She then goes to confront this lady and declare her love for Tamlin in the mountain where this lady resides, and ends up making a deal with her, which, sidebarring that for later as well, but she makes this deal and basically she has to complete 3 trials to prove that she's worthy of Tamlin's affection, I guess. Or she could just answer a ridiculously simple riddle and not have to do any of the trials, but it's the easiest riddle ever and she just does not figure it out. So she does all of the trials and then figures it out after the trials, because plot. And because this is only a third of the book, it is so rushed and the trials really suffer because of that. I would say that the first trial is really the only trial that didn't feel rushed to me, and it's the only one that I actually kind of enjoyed. The trials in general were also just kind of dumb, and I don't really get how they pertained to what the story was trying to communicate, or the large themes of the story, I guess, because I'm not really sure what the story was trying to communicate. But regardless, the trials just felt kind of random and didn't really seem to further any of the themes that were a part of the story. I found this to be especially true in the second trial, in which Feyre has to answer another riddle. That's right, the author couldn't have come up with another idea for a trial, so she has to answer another riddle before a bunch of spikes crash onto her and Lucien. So she basically just has to pull the lever with the correct answer. And this, to me, is where a lot of it really fell apart, and that is for a multitude of reasons. So firstly, it completely undermines Amarantha's character as this evil mastermind, because as far as I'm aware, she never knew that Feyre was illiterate. So this task was simply another riddle, which again just does not seem like something that an evil mastermind would develop to test or torture a human. But the second and more important issue with this trial is that Feyre had made a deal with another fairy named Rhysand to heal her arm after the first trial, and he basically leaves her with a tattoo after they make a deal. And Feyre discovers during this trial that she can communicate with Rhysand via her tattoo, and basically she cheats. She cheats to win this trial. Because she's illiterate and can't read the riddle, she basically hovers her hand over the levers, and whichever one she doesn't feel pain, holding it over, that's the one that she pulls, because Rhysand obviously knows the riddle, and because he's illiterate and the only one with half a brain. So I'm not really sure what this is trying to communicate about Feyre's character, nor am I sure as to what the purpose of it was, but it just made Feyre extra unlikable to me and further convinced me that Rhysand is the only character in this book who has the basest level of intelligence. So to finish off this plot section, I'd like to talk about the curse, and in my opinion, it doesn't work. There are so many things that I found to be annoying and illogical before we discover that it is all of a curse that made the first 2/3 of this book really unenjoyable to read. That is not what you want out of a reader's experience. So here are just a few things that bothered me before we discover the curse. So first off, why the heck would you let someone who just murdered and skinned your friend live, let alone invite them to your mansion to live out the rest of their days in peace and prosperity? That made no sense to me and bothered me throughout so much of the novel. It was a really shaky foundation for the book to be built upon. And on top of that, besides Lucien, no one seems to care that she killed and skinned a fairy. Lucien is the only one who seems hurt and upset by his friend dying, and even Lucien forgives her far too easily. This is Hannibal Lecter levels of creepy and awful. I'm just saying. It just made all of the characters seem really shallow and unbelievable. None of them seemed to care or grieve for their lost friend, who, again, was murdered and skinned, which just bothered me so much. There is also no goal that our heroine is trying to achieve for the first 2/3 of this book after she's brought to Prythian, especially after she no longer wants to go home. So basically it's just meandering filler as she lounges about his estate and paints. And that is not the base of an engaging story. It's so dull. Post finding out about the curse, there are also a ton of things that don't make sense. For example, why, if they are trying to make her fall in love with Tamlin, is he coming to her house and basically threatening to kill her? That is not a good first impression to build a relationship off of. I don't understand why Tamlin is the one getting her when it could have been Lucian or someone else so that she has a bad impression of them and Tamlin could have a good first impression. It just felt really counterproductive. Another thing, why does Lucian hesitate to save her after she captures the Suriel from the Naga? If she is the only one who can break the curse, then why is he hesitating to save her? That made no sense. And, you know, if you think about it, why would he put her in danger by giving her the information to capture the Suriel if that's also hella dangerous? I don't understand why he would give her that information so that she could do that if, again, she is the only one that can break this curse, they're running out of time, and a lot of his friends have sacrificed their lives so that this can happen. It just makes no sense. Moving on from that, why do they send her back to the human world when they still have several days left, when she is so close to saying I love you? Because if she does it, then he can protect her. It's been made clear by the end of the book that the moment the curse is broken, he can kill her. When he gets his powers back, he can kill Amarantha. So why is he sending her back to the human world when he could so easily protect her if she just said I love you, which she's about to do. And it's become very obvious from their relations that she is well on her way to getting to that point and saying those words. I don't understand. Because, like, also, she's going to be much safer if you do end up breaking the curse and defeating Amarantha than if you send her to the human world where Amarantha is going to come and conquer it, because that's her whole end game, is she wants to conquer the human world. So why are you sending her back to the human world where she's defenseless if you could just protect her from Amarantha if she breaks the curse? Like, it seems like a pretty good gamble to me to try to do that. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about Beauty and the Beast. So as I mentioned earlier, I had no idea before I bought this book that it was a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and nor did I figure it out while I was reading it, which either indicates that I'm not the most intelligent, or, which is what I'm leaning towards because I don't like that first option, it was not well executed in this. And I'm gonna provide some support to my theory that it's the second one. So Beauty and the Beast explores, you know, important themes like beauty is what's on the inside, not what's on the outside. Let's just look at how they explored that in this text. So Feyre, who is our Belle, is described as being absolutely gorgeous on the outside, but is super insecure for no reason, which I absolutely hate and is such an issue in YA. Even going so far as to say her cheekbones are they're just too sharp. My cheekbones are just too sharp. She's not the strong, intelligent beauty that we get from many versions of the story, and instead she's so dumb. And she also just refuses to see the inner beauty of Tamlin until it's shoved so far down our throats that we're almost okay with the rapey bits. But don't worry, we're not okay with those. She seems to be, though, which is awful. But let's look a little bit more at Tamlin. He is our beast, and yet he is described as being absolutely gorgeous. But let's move on to the writing, which I hated. There was such an excessive use of dashes, and her descriptions were so wordy, and she also uses the same descriptions a lot. Like, for example, I didn't count, which I wish I had, but the amount of times that she said, "a shiver spider walked down my spine," I could cry. Or "a feeling of pain spider walked down my arm." Like, it was just a ridiculous amount of spider walking down body parts, and it drove me nuts. She also describes things with just an excessive amount of adjectives. For example, here is the first paragraph of page 4. Mesmerizing, the lethal gentle beauty of the snow. I'd soon have to return to the muddy frozen roads of the village, to the cramped heat of our cottage. Some small fragmented part of me recoiled at the thought. It's like she says everything twice to make it more potent, I guess, or more descriptive, but it just makes it feel very stilted and stuttery. There were also a few quotes that I posted on Twitter, one of which I just found to be hilarious, which I'm going to read to you, where it's just like, this description is clearly not giving the intended effect. Like, it was just like the words chosen were the wrong words. Like, for example, this, which is supposed to be a romantic scene. He pulled me onto his lap, holding me tightly against him as his lips parted mine. I became aware of every pore in my body when his tongue entered my mouth. Honey, that is not cute! Okay, so I'm not really going to go in depth into the world building of this book because, as I mentioned, I thought it was fine. It wasn't great. We didn't get to know a lot about the world, but it was enough to, service the plot and keep things going. So I didn't have a huge issue with it. I just wish that it had been communicated better. As I mentioned, there were some really heavy info dumps, and there were 3 that were really noticeable to me in particular, and I think that makes up the bulk of the exposition and world building in this story. So the first one is what I like to call the expositional inner monologue, and to me this is the least offensive. It was the other 2 that really drove me nuts. So the second one that I noticed was when she is in Tamlin's library and she discovers a mural of Prythian that has a bunch of different kind of images that tell the history of Prythian. This goes on forever and is not described in a way that is interesting, nor is it described in a way that is clear. I could not see this mural in my head, and it just felt like a really cheap way to try to get this information to the reader. The worst offender by far is when Feyre comes back to Prythian and discovers that Tamlin has been taken to the lair of Amarantha and his estate has been ransacked, and she runs into Alice, who was really the only servant person who we get to know in this novel, and basically Alice gives her 13 pages of expositional dialogue. But let's move on to my favorite part of all my reviews, the characters. As I mentioned earlier, I liked 2 of them, but my favorite of all of them would definitely have to be Lucien. I thought his character was one of the most well-rounded and developed, with a very interesting backstory that shows us a little bit more of the world and culture of Prythian and kind of the harshness of it. Like, I love that we get to see more of the world through his past and history. I genuinely enjoy that. And I also think that he's probably the least offensive and nicest character in this book, which is funny because he has this really hard, kind of sarcastic exterior that he puts on and portrays to the world, but I think deep down from his actions we see that he's actually a pretty good guy. Bonus for him also was he was as uncomfortable with the Feyre-Tamlin courtship as I was, and he would say those things out loud, and I just appreciated those feelings being acknowledged. The next character that I liked was Rhysand, and I just felt a wave of all of you just cringing. Let me be clear, I do not ship him and Feyre together because he is not a good guy. He is very abusive, and that is very problematic and a huge issue, them as a couple. So I do not ship that in the slightest. But that being said, I do think he's one of the more interesting and more intelligent characters in this book, which is a breath of fresh air after all of the other characters. He seemed to be the only character who was playing chess. Everyone else was just kind of winging it, but he seemed to be the only one who was in any control at any given moment. And that made me like him. And as a villain, he was much scarier and much more interesting than Amarantha. What I like about him is that in this book we don't really know where his head is at. We never know his true motivations, and that makes him a lot scarier than Amarantha. The one major thing that bothered me about Rhysand, besides the budding relationship with him and Feyre, was the whole bringing Feyre as an escort thing. That bothered me so much because it completely undermined all of the things that I liked about him. So Rhysand basically dresses Feyre up super scantily and paints her body in black swirly paint so that he can see who touches her. And then he drugs her and then gets her to perform lap dances and various other things while she's drugged. So that's awesome. But this is there's just no good reason for this. Basically, the reason that he gives in the story is that he wants to make Tamlin mad enough to kill Amarantha when he gets his powers back. But like, I'm pretty sure he's already pretty mad at Amarantha. Like, I'm pretty sure he doesn't need this extra thing because, you know, she cursed him for 50 years. She basically forced him to sacrifice a bunch of members of his court, which he did not seem to be too upset about, but we'll get to that in a second. On top of that, when he does end up falling in love with Feyre, she is now competing in 3 trials designed by Amarantha to torture her and probably kill her, because, you know, Amarantha's not like, ooh, let's make these just for fun. She wants Feyre to die. So I'm pretty sure Tamlin already has quite a few reasons to be upset at Amarantha. So I don't understand why Rhysand thinks it's a good idea to make Tamlin mad at him as well. Like, he was kind of off the hook. He is just as much under Amarantha's thumb as Tamlin is. But this is across the line. This is playing with Tamlin's girl. And Amarantha isn't ordering it. So really he's just making Tamlin mad at him for no reason. So despite Rhysand seeming to have a brain for some of the things, this just undermined all of it, which made me really upset because I kind of liked him. He was kind of intimidating. It's fine. But yeah, speaking of dumb things, let's chat about Amarantha. She is not a good villain. Like, before we meet her, she's built up to be this really scary, like, we don't even know her name. She's like Voldemort. Everyone just calls her she. She's made up to be this master manipulator who has taken Prythian from all of the High Lords through manipulation and trickery only, and intimidation. Like, she has taken power not through war at all, but just with her mind. But then we meet her, and I'm like, how? Because she's so dumb. Like, she basically ends up being this cartoon villain, and she makes this deal with Feyre for no reason. Like, Feyre comes waltzing into her court, and she can just be like, that was dumb of you, prepare to die. Like, that seems like a reasonable thing for Amarantha to do, especially knowing her history. But instead, she cuts this deal with Feyre to win her and Tamlin and the entire Spring Court's freedom, which basically Amarantha should know will result in her death because Tamlin will come after her. So obviously, if she is this mastermind, she knows that this is the conclusion and that Feyre can't win. And yet, she designs these 3 stupid trials, which don't really seem to have a thematic point. And on top of that, she gives Feyre the easiest riddle in the history of riddles as an out. She says, I will immediately, because she was doing a whole play on words thing where she was going to basically make a deal with Feyre and she would free them after they had died if Feyre won. So it would have been moot anyway. But in the deal with Feyre, with the riddle, she promises that if she answers the riddle, she will release them immediately. So why is she building in this easy out for Feyre if she is this master manipulator? And like, I don't know why she has to do the trials anyway. Like, is she trying to punish Feyre? Because it seems like torture would accomplish that. Like, I don't know why she wants Feyre to prove that she is good enough for Tamlin. I don't understand how any of it's relevant to her master plans or why she's doing any of it, which is not great for a villain. And then on top of that, she's not even the formidable fighter that we've heard that she is, because Tamlin, once he's freed from the curse, kills her immediately. He just goes and he like mauls her. And the other thing is, it seems like he would have been able to do it without the curse breaking anyway, because he literally just turns into his wolf form and like mauls her. It's not like he was doing something that was like out of the realm of possibility before. Like, he could have done that earlier. So I don't get it. So speaking of our boy Tamlin, good lord, he is so boring. He is the most generic brand, Wonderbread version of a male love interest I have ever seen. Like, he has no personality really, besides being overbearing and selectively protective. I don't feel like I know him at all, which is insane, because we spent 2/3 of this book focusing on his and Feyre's romance and connection and building them up to hinge the whole story on. He's also got this really like creepy, overprotective and controlling undertones to all of his actions that really doesn't lend itself to him being an attractive love interest that I can ship. Like, the Calanmai stuff is so wrong, it's so rapey, and I don't care if she ends up being okay with it the next day, it's not okay. He basically pins her to a wall against her will, and she repeatedly says, both verbally and with her actions, no, please let me go. He still pins her and then marks her by biting her neck. That's so wrong. I don't care how you explain it away or how romantic you portray it, I cannot get behind that. Okay, but like, what are Tamlin's interests? I know he used to be in a war band and used to do dirty poetry, but besides that, he really doesn't seem to have any hobbies or anything to his personality. Anything to make him interesting or, you know, a character. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what else I can say about Tamlin because there really isn't much to say. And last but not least, it's time to talk about our leading lady. Feyre is so dumb. She is constantly told by all these people who have more experience than her in this world that she should not do things. And then she acknowledges that she should not do these things. And then she does them anyway. It's like she has a death wish. It's so frustrating because she knows she shouldn't, everyone else knows she shouldn't, and she does it anyway to dire consequences and ends up usually hurting herself and others. It's extremely selfish and it serves no purpose and drove me insane. An example of this is when she goes and catches the Suriel, which Tamlin told her not to do, and Lucien warns that she should not do it because it's dangerous, and she does it anyways. She also does everything that Alice tells her not to do when she goes into the mountain, which is annoying, and basically just takes advice from no one for no reason, despite acknowledging that it's probably good advice. Like, I cannot stand being inside the head of someone who is so opposed to common sense. It's ridiculous. Feyre is also kind of a jerk. She grew up in poverty, and yet she's totally okay with being waited on by a bunch of staff and servants when she goes to Tamlin's estate. Like, you'd think that because she grew up with nothing, she'd have more in common with the people that are serving her and be uncomfortable with it than fitting in with the High Lords. One would think that those would be the people that she tried to converse with and befriend, and you can argue that she kind of did that with Alice, but it was so surface level that it doesn't really count, and she does that with literally none of the other staff in the entire book. I don't know. Also, the fairy world never really seems to faze her, despite growing up her entire life being told that it's super dangerous, and then being proven on several accounts that it is super dangerous. One would think that this would be super alien to her, and she would require some time to adjust from, you know, the human world to something entirely different. So it's really strange to me that this never really seems to happen. She seems to be pretty well adjusted pretty quickly, except for the fact that she wants to go home to look after her family for no reason. So let's look at the painting thing, because it seems to be her only interest and also the only thing that kind of constitutes her personality. But like, it doesn't really say much about her because the art in this book is described in a way that is so non-specific. It says absolutely nothing about her because we have no understanding about what painting looks like and what art styles there are in this world. I'm gonna throw up a few paintings on the screen right now. These are all paintings by different artists, and you can just let me know if they look and feel the same to you, because all we ever get in the book is, this is a painting with colors. That's as descriptive as it gets. Is it detailed? Is it hyper-realistic? Is it abstract? Is there texture? Can we see the brush strokes? Is it sharp or softer? What are the stylistic differences between what she's been exposed to in the human world versus the styles of the fairy paintings? I am an art nerd, so I get that this wouldn't bother everyone, but at the same time, it's just such a missed opportunity. I'd also just like to point out that she doesn't really have an arc. She is a dumb murderer at the start of the book, and she is a dumb murderer at the end of the book. And I think that's all I really need to say. Also though, her relationship with Tamlin felt so insta-lovey. They have nothing in common as far as I can tell, despite feeling like they had pressure put on them by external forces. Tamlin with the curse, her with her family. That is the only bonding point. Which, like, her circumstances have changed, so she's just like, I can empathize with that, I can sympathize, but like, it's not like she's living that anymore. But like, she doesn't seem to empathize that much also, just because like she doesn't really ask about how Tamlin is doing during all of this, dealing with all of this stuff. He's clearly under a lot of pressure, and she's not asking about it. She's just ignoring it, which is not what a good partner in a relationship would do, just saying. But on top of that, they never really seem to have like milestones where they bond. They never seem to have that much romantic tension or any kind of spark whatsoever. But also like the one moment where I remember them, like that's the moment that they kind of bond and like, you know, kind of get together a little bit. I feel like it's very indicative of who they are, and they kind of deserve each other, because that moment is when Fair is dumb and goes and hunts the Suriel and then gets chased by the Naga and ends up killing a bunch of them, and then Tamlin goes and kills the other ones, and then he clasps her bloody hand in his bloody hand, and like, if I remember correctly, like brushes his lips against her face or lips or something. Like, cute. You seriously deserve each other. Alright guys, that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I think that's all I kind of have to say about A Court of Thorns and Roses. I don't think I'm going to be carrying on with any of Sarah J Maas's work. I just don't like the way that she develops characters or worlds or plots. Or just her writing in general, so I think we're just going to leave it at this and call it a day. So thank you again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I would love to hear your thoughts about this book. If you agree with me or if you disagree, I would still like to hear that regardless. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.